Stream is live now. What can I say? I'm supposed to finish the hair, I guess. What? Great, that's fine. Okay. I'm so lost with what to do next. You're still here? What you want? And it's better to make it look better. First try, so let me.
Now create a new project and spare the default cube because that's our best friend. Select it and add a subdivision surface. Now create a new project and spare the default cube because that's our best friend. Select it and add a subdivision and surface modifiers. Crank levels viewport up to 3 and apply. We created a sphere that is better than this and ensure it looks loose. What I like to do is select now. I usually don't join all my strands until later, but I'll show you how to do it now. Basically select both edge loops where it would connect, so the top of the hair strand and the bottom of the base. Then search for the function bridge edge loops. What I like to do is select this middle edge and dissolve it, not delete it, sorry. And then re-add that loop cut so that it's just a smoother transition. In object mode I did shade smooth by angle. Not really necessary, but it looks nice. Now you only need to know one more thing, which is how to create offshoot strands, which are just the strands originating from a strand. I'll start by making one near the top of this hair strand, pressing 3 to enter face select mode and deleting a face where I want it to originate from. Press 1 to go back to vertice mode and select the 2 top vertices of that open face, then press E to extrude it down diagonally. That'll seams. It's best you do, because if you don't, and you stay in this mode, seams. It's best you do this as you go along and before you merge everything down, because that will make things easier. If you wait until everything's cluttered, it could be disorganized and you'll have a hard time going back and making sure everything has its seams. So it's recommended you do it as you go along, and as you can see, each individual strand will be seamed at the root as well as front to back. This will make texturing much more convenient later. And let me show you how to set that up. Let's clear the seams. For the top, you can alt left click the edge and just search for mark seam, or it's also here on edge, mark seam. Then I also do these 2 edges and make sure it's closed at the bottom here. This separates the back of the strand from the front of the strand so that you can easily paint the back different from the front, because the back is usually some kind of shadow. So here on the offshoot, it's the same concept. Let's start with the back of the strand, separating it from the front. And if your strands are only one face wide, you'll have to use edge select mode. So you can click that or press 2. Because if you don't, and you stay in this mode, when you select both of these edges, guess what? It's gonna mark all of those in between, and that's why it's better in edge select mode. Don't forget this at the bottom. Again, we separate at the root as well. So here, select these edges and mark seam, and you're good to go. As a final check, you can do a quick unwrap to make sure all the islands are separate and you don't have any weird UV islands that are like circular. If I were intentionally to break these seams, let's just clear all the seams and re-unwrap it. This is what it would look like, and you cannot texture that. And this is what happens if one of the offshoot strands are not seamed correctly. To fill in the hairstyle and make it feel complete, I had to add more strands and vary them. So I add medium-sized strands to the large strands, give them edges. Guess what? It's gonna mark all of those in between, and that's why it's better in edge select mode. Don't forget this at the bottom. Again, we separate at the root as well. So here, select these edges and mark seam, and you're good to go. As a final check, you can do a quick unwrap to make sure all the islands are separate and you don't have any weird UV islands that are like circular. If I were intentionally to break these seams, let's just clear all.
Texture paint. How does he go? Hmm. Hmm.
select these edges, and mark scene. And you're good to go. As a final check, you can do a quick unwrap to make sure all of the islands are separate and you don't have any weird
Yeah, how do I check it? Hmm.
I'm Black Ice, and I believe you can become a better developer. And in this video, you'll be learning about UV unwrapping. We'll be going over what it is and how to do it. Now, what is UV unwrapping? Now, when you have a 3D model, you have to texture it through a 2D texture. And through UV unwrapping, you can translate the space information into a 2D plane. You do this through selecting seams that will cut the faces. Now, a good example is imagining a shirt. If you get all the seams on it and lay it out, that's basically what UV unwrapping is. Now, every texture needs seams, and good seams will make the texture the same size and won't distort it. And most of the time, you just place seams in the breaks of a model. For example, seams on a shirt or sharp edges. Now, a general rule is to try to hide your UVs. This way, you don't have any seams stretching across an open face of the model, because this can lead to visible gaps or edges in a texture. Now, before we begin, always make sure to apply the scale to your object, because if you have multiple objects, this can lead to uneven UVs, which is not good. Anyways, let's get into my workflow for UV unwrapping. Okay, so I have this model here, and I want to UV unwrap it. So what I usually start with is I go into the UV editing tab, select new. You can rename this to whatever you want. I'll just rename this to UV grid, and it's usually generated blank by default, so you want to set it to UV grid. And just click new image, and here it is. And you go into the shading tab, select your model, import an image texture, find that UV grid we just saved, plug it into the base color, and now we have a UV grid, but as you can probably tell, it's slightly messed up. So head back to the layout tab, go into material view, and now it's time to UV unwrap this. What I always tend to do is just start by marking seams on all the sharp faces. So basically anything that's a 90-degree angle, I'll put a seam there, and I also tend to change it to different textures so I can see the red UV lines. The fast way you can do this is go select sharp edges, crank this up a lot, which is like 89, and then just mark seam. There we go. The unwrap angle based, you can already tell it's slightly better. If you look right here, you can see it's distorted, which is exactly what you don't want. So what we need to do, add a seam like right here, unselect that, mark seam. I would mark seam right here too. Okay, let's unwrap again. Okay, nice. It's basically unwrapped already. So go to the UV editing tab and see our UVs. You can highlight everything to see it better. Now it's filling up a decent amount of the grid, but there's still a lot of gaps. And if you're working with like a 1K texture for performance, you really want to fill this up as much as you can. So I might go around adding a couple more seams so it can be a tighter unwrap. And usually with curves, it has a whole lot of empty space. So sometimes you'll want to unwrap. Now only do this if you really have to, because you can easily get these ugly texture areas where you can clearly see the line, and that's pretty bad because if you don't correctly texture it, it'll look really ugly and it'll probably just ruin the complete texture. But only do that if you really have to. Oh, there's still a weird slice right here. So a good way to find things is just highlight it here, move it around. You can see it moving here. Now I know that I need to edit this, find out where, I think right there. Since there's no edge right here that I can select add a seam, I'll just create my own by pressing J and then marking that seam there. That way it splits it up a little better. Now the smaller the grid, the more high quality the texture will be. That's why I'm just going in, selecting some extra edges to add seams to, so the unwrap will be tighter. But again, you don't need to do this if you're working with like 2K or 4K textures. It's better to have cleaner seams where it's not blatantly going across the model. But since I work mainly with 1K textures, I'm just doing this to optimize it further. Now this is a pretty good UV. It's pretty compact. If you look here, there's no distortion. And now it's basically ready to be taken into Substance Painter and texture it, or to texture in whatever program you use. Okay, tutorial over. If you found it helpful, then like and subscribe. I post
So you've made your first object or character in Blender, and now you want to add some color. Someone told you you'll need to UV unwrap your model first, so you Googled UVs and had a mini breakdown. What are these strange grid shapes, and how on earth do they relate to your 3D model? Let me level with you. As 3D artists, we have a tendency to overcomplicate things. Now, don't get me wrong, things like retopology and UV maps are extremely important, and the more complex your models become, the more important they become. But for beginners, these technical tools work like gatekeepers. They frustrate new users, and they make them jump through multiple hoops just to do something basic like adding a few simple colors. So in this video, we're going to do away with UV seams, projection mapping, UDIMs, and all that technical jargon. And instead, I'm going to jump on over to the texture paint workspace. Technically, you can texture paint from the layout workspace, but this sets up our windows nicely for us, as well as giving us access to a couple of additional tools. If you try and paint on your model now, you'll see nothing happens. But we do get this little error down the bottom. It says missing UVs, materials, and textures detected. So we're missing 3 necessary things here. Let's start by creating a material because maybe you're already familiar with those. Jump down to the materials properties tab and click the new to create a new material. If we change the color, you'll see that nothing happens in the viewport. That's because we're still in solid view, which usually just shows a simple gray version of your model. If you want to see this color, change the viewport to material. Now when we change the base color, the viewport will update. If we try and paint on our model now, we'll still get an error saying we're missing UVs and textures. Okay, let's create those UVs. Up on the top menu here, under the drop down called texture slots, you can see this warning message that says UV map needed. Next to this button, add simple UVs. So let's push that button. In the image editor window, you can see some UVs pop into existence. Being an automated method, this isn't the best UV layout in history. There's quite a few UV islands as well as a lot of empty space, but this is good enough for you to start painting. For anyone wondering, this simple UVs option is the same as going into edit mode, selecting everything and pressing U to bring up the unwrap menu, and then choosing smart UVs. The add simple UVs button will only be visible if you have no UVs at all, and most of Blender's default objects come with some UVs to begin with. If you can't find the add simple UVs button, use the unwrap menu. There's a lot of different UV options in the menu, but smart UVs is a very quick and dirty method to get you up and running quickly. Unfortunately, we still have that pesky missing textures error we need to address. What might not be immediately intuitive to new users is that although we have UVs, the UVs themselves don't hold the color data. For that, we need an image texture like a JPEG or a PNG. Back in our tools menu, you should see this text saying no textures. Next to that is a plus button. Tap that and you'll see a whole bunch of options. All of these relate to different textures you can create for your object, such as how shiny or how bumpy the surface is. Leave all of that for another day. For now, we just want the base color. In this new pop-up window, you can choose how big you want your textures to be. If you're making models for video games, 1024 by 1024 will probably be big enough. Working in film and animation, I usually use larger textures, so I'm going to crank this up to 2K or 2048 by 2048. For this texture, we don't need alpha, although it's not really going to do any harm if you do accidentally leave it on. I'm also going to choose a light brown color as our base to paint on, and click OK. The mushroom in the viewport should change color to that light brown, and you may notice that your UV window suddenly zoomed in. This happens because we chose to use a larger texture size. You can zoom back out of this if you want to see all of your UVs again. And now, at last, we're ready to paint. I'm going to choose a red color to paint on top of the mushroom. You can select a color either from the viewport menu at the top or from the side panel. You can control the strength and the radius of your brush at the top, or you can right-click in the viewport to bring up the same options. Sometimes you might paint a section you didn't want to by accident. If you want to get that brown color back on your brush, hover over your model and press the Shift X shortcut. This will sample where the color is below your mouse. In Blender 3.6 and earlier, the shortcut is just the S key. And finally, I'll add some white spots, because all good mushrooms need white spots. This is lore in the fantasy genre. I'll paint in some large white spots, not being too concerned with whether they're perfectly circular, and then I'll fill in the gaps with some smaller white spots. Now for the single most important step of the tutorial, save your texture. This is extremely important because Blender doesn't do this by default, not even when you save your scene. So you need to save this texture to your hard drive, or the next time you open Blender, that texture will be gone. Over in your image editor, go to the image menu. This little star symbol next to the menu is specifically there to tell you that this image hasn't been saved yet. The file should already be named something like mushroom base color, which is a good name. Choose a simple file format, either PNG or JPEG is good. Personally, I use PNGs these days as I found that JPEGs from Blender can introduce some artifacts. Once saved, you'll see that little star symbol in the menu has disappeared. This is a very quick and dirty workflow. As you make more complicated objects, you're going to want to learn some more complicated UV unwrapping techniques. In this next video, I'll show you how you can UV unwrap and add texture to an object. But for now, congratulations, you've just unwrapped and textured your first model. I'm going to put some eyes on this little fella. Now he's a happy little mushroom.
Still don't get it. And anything? Nothing's happened. Hello? Still working? Hmm. Like, what am I supposed to do now?
In this tutorial, I'm going to show you some nice new features in Blender 5 to help with your unwrapping. The new tools designed to simplify and speed up your workflow. If you
Oh,
want
really?
a comprehensive guide covering why we unwrap, the alternatives to unwrapping and best practices, then I recommend watching my detailed guide, and it's in my unwrapping playlist, link in the description. So let's take a look at unwrapping in Blender 5 and the nice new features. I'm in Blender 5.1 and I've got the basic startup file here with the default cube selected. Let's go across to the UV editing workspace so we can see our unwrap and therefore our UVs. So if I click on that, because we have the default cube selected, it takes me into edit mode, which you can see up here, and it shows me on the left hand side our unwrap and therefore our UVs. So if I click on that, because we have the default cube selected, it takes me into edit mode, which you can see up here, and it shows me on the left hand side my unwrap. Incidentally, if I go to the object data properties down here, I can open up the UV maps menu, and there is my UV map just there. Notice if I delete this, it will delete my map just there. I'll undo that now. What I'm going to
Hmm.
do as well, just for demonstration, I'm going to pull out a new window just here. So move my cursor to the corner, click and drag it down across the left-hand side, and change this to the shader editor. I'll press N on my keyboard to get rid of the side panel, and you can see our default material just here. I'm going to add a texture in here so you can kind of see what's going on our cube. So Shift A to add texture, and then I want an image texture, and I can bring that in the front here. If I hook it up at the moment, we won't see anything in the viewport. One, because we're in solid mode, so I'll middle mouse button and click across this top menu and change to material preview mode. But it's all black because we haven't actually got a texture in here. So I'll create a new one, and I'm going to generate a color grid and press new image. So you can see our color grid on our cube just there, and it corresponds to the UV layout just here. Now here's the interesting thing.
How did he split the screen again?
And there is my UV map just there. Notice if I delete this, it will delete my map just there. I'll undo that though. What I'm going to do as well, just for demonstration, I'm going to pull out a new window just here. So move my cursor to the corner, click and drag it down across the left.
Serious. Dude, am I stupid or? What?
left-hand side and change this to the shader editor. I'll press N on my keyboard to get rid of the side panel, and you can see our default material just here. I'm going to add a texture in here so you can kind of see what's going on our cube. So Shift A to add texture, and then I want an image texture, and I can bring that in the front here. If I hook it up at the moment, we won't see anything in the viewport. One, because we're in solid mode, so I'll middle mouse button and click across this top menu and change to material preview mode, but it's all black because we haven't actually got a texture in here. So I'll create a new one, and I'm going to generate a color grid and press new image. So you can see our color grid on our cube just there, and it corresponds to the UV layout just here. Now here's the interesting thing in Blender 5. I'll just bring this out a little bit more and zoom in just a touch. Currently it kind of defaults to the old way of doing things. So if I go to face mode at the top here and select a face, let's say this one here, so H4 and H5, H4 and H5, we know it's this face. And we also know it's this face because I selected it here and you can see it highlighted in the viewport. That is this button just here, UV sync selection. So whichever face I select, so let's choose this one here, we can see it's that area there, and so on. So these three are on this side facings. However, if I want to choose this one at the side here, so this one just here, if I press G to grab to move it to a different location, the rest of the UVs around it move with it. So you can see the stretching that's going on over here and down here as I move this texture around. So I'll undo that, so it's back to where it was. Now the nice thing is we've got this option at the side here, so sticky selection mode, and this is really handy. So at the moment we've got shared location, and that's the default. So when we move any of these, anything joined to it will move around with it. Then there's this shared vertex option. So again, I'll choose the top one here, but notice when I select it, it's showing you where the shared vertices are. So this vertex up here is linked to this one and this one down here. So when I press G to grab, you can see it's moving those as well. And again, that can be quite useful. That's the shared vertex option. Then probably a more commonly used one is to just turn it off entirely, so disabled. If I now press G to grab, I can separate this out and I could put it over the top of this side one here. So we've got F6 there and F6 there. And I could in fact just pile them all on top of each other like this if I wanted to. And now they all share that F6 and F7, E6 and E7, although I haven't particularly well placed them. So it's a really useful option in Blender 5 that I'm really pleased they've added, because in the past we had to turn sync selection off in order to move them around. But then when we selected our faces, so I can select in here, for example, press G to grab and move it across, I could select this one and move it across. It's really useful to be able to have sync selection. But in the past we weren't able to turn off the stickiness or this shared location. But now we've got the disable option. We can come in and choose our different areas and move them around nice and easily. Now one last tip, if I select all with A and go onto UVs, there's an option of pack islands. This isn't new, but it has been updated. So when you choose pack islands, there's a few new options which you might not be aware of. But also, if I press pack now, it does some calculating and it's a much better packing system. So it will make the most of your UVs. In this particular case, this is the most efficient way of packing it, which doesn't seem that efficient because we've got all this spare space over here. But when you have a few more islands, it'll pack them, and it's that bit better than it used to be. So that's another update for Blender 5, which I'm really pleased with. So hopefully you found this helpful. Do let me know if I've missed anything that you think is important, or if you haven't. This video is all you need to know about UV unwrapping for the 3D artist. I'll be talking through what unwrapping is and if there are any rules we should follow as 3D artists to make our unwrapping more effective. If you like what I do, then do check out my website and the playlist on this channel for more great content. Also, the Game Dev TV Black Friday sale has started, and you can get 4 courses for the price of around $30, so some great savings to be had there. Check the links in the description for more info. So let's begin by asking what is unwrapping and what are seams. So unwrapping is taking a 3D object and turning it into a 2D map so we can place a texture onto that object. A good example would be how a piece of clothing is like a 3D object, but it's made out of one piece of fabric. The clothing is stitched together, and these stitched lines
What's going on here? Uh, Hmm? How should it work? Hmm. It's not working at all. Ah. Check. Hmm. Hmm. Weight paint. Can't click something and he's thinking now. Oh, great. Okay, so it stopped working here. So he done something. Again, he's doing something. Hmm. To be honest, I have no idea. Okay, let me try to. Something is yes, no. Okay. What does I have to do this today? Oh my gosh. Still have no idea how to do the UV unwrapping. Okay, I did something at least. Oh, but I want to sleep now. Oh, I still with this. Somehow my passion burned out. And question is, what's with the eyebrow? Okay. Okay. Save it as is. So damn hard to finish it. I just don't have the tenacity to do it. Oh, sorry. Not far away, but pwah. Damn, but I got so bored at this point. Still I'll have to make the rework, the clothes. There's so much to it. And I still have no idea how this UV mapping works. No, have to work on the eyes. No, I just mentally cannot work on it. I don't know. I'm drained of energy. So do it. Oh my gosh. On the one hand, I'm closer than I was before, and the other hand, it's so far away still. Damn it. Oh well. Yeah, I'll be finishing this for today. I'll try to.
Are called seams. It's exactly the same with 3D objects. The UV map tells your 3D program where on your 3D model you would like the textures to go. The next question you may be asking is, does it matter where I put the seams, and can I get away with not as crucial? For example, if we use texture painting, so painting on the texture ourselves, it doesn't matter so much where the seams are, because when painting, the program is able to make it work without any problems. And there's no crookedness or jump to the texture across the seams. You can also project textures using a kind of box projection from all different sides. This, however, isn't without its problems, and where the projection meets each other, you can often get a jump in the texture once again. You can also use procedural texturing techniques which map differently, a bit like box projection. There still comes an issue though if you want to export your textures and model from one program to another. You often need to bake out the textures, and that involves marking seams. However, this is similar to texture painting, where the program is able to make it work across the seams without the jump and crookedness. Having said that, keeping to simple rules of marking seams will help with any glitches that might happen in that process. So the next question might be, what are we aiming for with our unwrapping or texture maps? And can we do just an automatic unwrap in the program? So within Blender, for example, you can use what's called a smart UV project. Unfortunately, that creates a lot of seams, which means a lot of islands, which are individual areas of the model on your texture map. More seams and more islands means more chance of getting a jump or crookedness in your texture. So a good rule is to create as few seams as possible, so we don't get the crookedness or texture jump problems. So with that in mind, we keep the seams and the islands to a minimum. So where should we be marking seams to stop the problems? Well, the first place and most obvious place is where a texture or a color breaks. So in real life, clothing does have a natural seam, and you'll often see a break in texture on the clothing. So it does happen in real life and with real objects, and therefore we can mimic that in our program. Another example would be different panels of a vehicle, where some are painted metal and others might be plastic. Now these are commonly built as separate objects, so there would be no need to mark seams, but they sometimes can be built as one for low poly games or similar. So again, you would put a seam along the line where the texture breaks from one panel to the other. A third example would be something like a table leg. Where the table legs meet the top, you have a natural break in the texture, so that would be the best place for the seams. Another simple rule is to try and hide your seams. It seems obvious, but it's worth a mention. Try and put your seams in places where the viewer or the audience will not easily see them. So with the table, once again for an example, the insides of the table legs is the obvious place. How do I know if I have enough seams and enough islands? And this comes down to stretching. If we don't have enough seams, then the texture tries to stretch itself across the model, which then leads us onto the question, how do we stop stretching? Well, for that to happen, we have to make sure that we have enough seams, but we want to place them in the correct places so that we don't have too many and therefore too many islands. So how do we place them in the correct places? Well, let's remind ourselves why we have to mark seams. We're trying to map 3D objects to 2D. Therefore, if we don't include seams like I've done with this cylinder here, it just squashes flat and everything stretches as it tries to spread out the shape. With that in mind, we need to mark the seams to break the 3D shapes like this cylinder down into 2D. So we can think about more complex shapes by breaking it down into basic primitives or basic shapes like cylinders and boxes. Take this awkward shape here. I want to unwrap this with as few seams as possible, therefore as fewer islands as possible. So as I said earlier, let's break it down into simple primitives. Here's a cylinder shape, so I can mark the seams like we would a cylinder. And with a cylinder, I think of a tin of food. The middle section has a label going all the way around, so we can simply mark one seam down one side in order to create this so-called label. Then it's just the top and the bottom caps left to cut out. So we do the same for our odd shape here. Here's the cylinder shape at the top. I cut out the two caps, obviously there's none at the bottom, but I cut a seam there anyway, and one down the side for that kind of label section. So what about the middle? Well, that's an obvious box shape. So I can mark this area like I would a box. And when we look at a box, we think about how a cardboard box is made out of one piece of cardboard. We can unwrap a box in the same way. So let's unwrap this box area in the same way. Now I'll quickly speed up that process of me marking the seams out here. Within this box area, there's another cylinder, so let's cut out the cylinder using the same techniques. So the two caps tools, and this time I'll choose the edge on the very upper inside. That's slightly hidden. That will create our label section. So now the whole shape is unwrapped, and we can press our unwrap button. And we can see now that the texture has been spread across relatively evenly, and we don't have too much stretching. I could even cut this down a bit further to make the most of my UV space by cutting the box into further islands, and you can see how that changes the UV mapping on our shape here. Now let's add a texture to that so you can see what it looks like, and it seems to be working well. Let's finish off by looking at the monkey once again. Now when the monkey's unwrapped, you can see the ears. They're a bit like a cylinder, but this has actually been unwrapped a little bit more like a box unwrap, so just one UV seam to break up that 3D shape. With this technique, you will end up getting a little bit of stretching, but it does minimize the amount of islands. The eyes are obvious areas that can just be unwrapped by themselves. They are actually a separate part of the mesh. Then comes the skull, and you can see it's got a seam across the top and one going all the way around the back of the shape. And that kind of splays it out, once again a bit like the box unwrap. And that top section is to help spread it out without too much stretching. So that finishes this guide to unwrapping, why we need it, where to mark seams and so forth. Do keep an eye out for more videos on the subject. Do also comment below any thoughts that you might have. I hope you learned something from this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Hello and welcome to Media. I'm Grant Abbott, and today we're going to go through UV
Alright. How do I... if I add texture to mesh? Because I guess I have a problem with this. Image texture.
I'm CG. This is our to show how to add image texture in Blender. After starting Blender, we can add an object and make it simple. I will add a plan and close up over it, and I press set to change it to material preview. Next, we can have two options to add image texture. The first option, we can select the object first and then go to material properties and then add a new material. Next, we can go to base color. We can click the dots and then we can find image texture here. And then we can click open to link your image. I have a wooden for image and then click open image to add image texture to the material. This is the first option. I delete the material. We can use second option. We can use shader editor. I split the viewports into two. One is for preview the texture and another one I will switch to shader editor. So we can add the new material here and then we can find in support BSDF shader looks is added and then we can just click and search image texture and then click to add image texture look here and then click open and then link the image and then click open the image to import the image into image texture look and then connect color to base color. So we can find the image texture is added to the object. So this is the two options to add image texture in Blender. Thank you for watching this video. Hope it's helped. Please subscribe to this channel. More video will be shared with you. I'm CG. See you in the next video.
How do I paint this texture? Because I have... Hi Ghost in the Net. What's up? Terribly sleepy.
In the past, I talked about how to paint an image on a 3D model using an...
For methods to paint my hair, I guess. As you can see, I got this model which I made from the scratch. I went to UV editing and I wanted to add image texture and start like painting and connecting the hairs together, but yeah, I couldn't paint. I'm new to Blender, so I'm still learning, and yeah, that's what's up.
an external tool such as Photoshop or GIMP. However, I realized that I never talked about painting on an object directly in Blender. I also couldn't find an up-to-date and straightforward video that discusses the matter, so in this video that's exactly what I will be doing. So here's my Blender open. I'm currently using version 4.4. I've already imported
Yeah, I need to figure it out. I stacked on it. I just connected few hair strands to main hair mesh, and I just don't have the mental capacity to learn anything more today. I also wanted to go offline now and start, I don't know, playing some games probably. But yeah, now I'm stuck on the tutorial and check how can I configure the texture to mesh.
my model, which is the model of the charm from Counter-Strike 2. I'll head to the Texture Paint tab, and here we'll find our model in pink. And the pink color tells us that the texture assigned to the model doesn't have an image which will contain our paintings. So first thing we need to do is to create an image. We do so by going to the texture slot section at the top and clicking on the plus sign. And now we get a list which contains types of images we can create. For now, we only paint colors on the model, so let's choose base color. In the dialog we can set some important settings that will define our image. I will leave the name of the image as it is, but you can change it to something more meaningful, especially if you're going to create more than one coloring image for any reason. Then we have the resolution of the image, which in my case I will set to 2048 by 2048. And finally, I'll jump to the color section. Whatever color you choose here will be the starting color of the image. For this demonstration, I'll set the color to green and hit the add button. I will also change the view to material preview since we can see the changes done to the model better that way. And now we can see that the object has turned to green.
Sculpting modeling. Move this down, this down, this. Restaurants. And why does it has eyebrow color? Huh? Material texture test. Okay, and now shading. The texture and image texture. Connect color to base color. Texture test, like alpha color, it's me, pick this color, new image, texture color, blah 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 blah. Okay, texture paint. Yeah, and now I got a problem how to unwrap it. Here, let me go there. Brush size. So where did I add the material? Under. So I created a new material and added it to what? Yes. Huh? Okay, let's go again. This is a UV map. Under her, under her. Texture matte. Okay, I got this hair strand. Texture material shading. Settings, blah blah blah. So it's not is color this, and object modifies. It's still not added to it. Assign. Okay, now I have this material assigned to okay, UV editing. UV unwrap conformal, unwrap UV map. Okay, and where is that UV mapping? Add texture. And not color, image, texture, and image texture. I would have an. Okay, now we're getting somewhere slowly. Hair test, great. So I have. Yeah, so I changed color, changed everything, but I still don't know how to unwrap it on this UV map. Okay. Okay. UV unwrap. Object modes. Select. The learning experience. Okay, so I need to actually Okay. Now I'll be able to paint it. Still unable to paint on it. Hmm. make a difference.
We can also see that on the left we have a green image as well. This is the image we've just created, and it will be the 2D representation of our 3D model. We can see all sorts of shapes in the image. This is called the UV sheet of the model, which again is a 2D representation of the object. In my case, I got the UV sheet ready with the model because I wasn't the one to create it. But if you're creating the model from scratch, then you will need to do something called UV unwrapping before you paint. However, this is a different topic and won't talk about it in this video. Let's head to the shading tab for a quick moment. Here we can see little windows called nodes, which define in the background how the texture of our model looks. When we created the green image a moment ago, Blender created this node for us and connected it to the base color of this node here, which is called a shader. We will not dwell too much on the node setting in this video in order to keep things as simple as possible, but it is important to know what's going on here. Okay, let's go back to the texture paint tab. We can already start drawing on the model by pressing the left mouse button. So basically our work is done. However, we have many available settings and it's worth going over the important ones. First, let's start with the size of the brush. You can control the size
Am I that dumb or what? I just...
is either by pressing F and moving the mouse left and right, or we can use the radius value at the top and set the amount of pixels we want. And if we reduce the size of the brush, we can have better control of what we draw. Next, let's take a look at the color picker section. The left color is the active one that will be used by the brush. If we click on it, we can change the color to whatever we want. You can raise the value to get more color options. You can also switch between the two colors either by pressing X or by pressing on this button. And again, you can change the color of this one as well. Now let's jump to the stroke section. Here we can decide how to draw. Currently the stroke method is set to space, which allows us to draw freely. I won't discuss all the options, but it's worth checking out two more useful ones. And we'll start with the line method. As the name tells us, with this method we can draw straight lines by pressing at one point and releasing at another. You can also lock the angle by pressing the Alt button after pressing the left.
The hell is... Oh, just... No, I don't have capacity today to understand it. Missing text. It's still not painting it. I went so many. Oh, it's so dumb. Okay. I'm quitting for today.
Left mouse button.
Just
Another useful option
paint
is the
over.
curve, which allows us to draw bezier curves on the model. In order to create a curve, first you need to click on the new button. Then you need to create the nodes of the curve, which can be done by pressing the Ctrl and right mouse buttons. If you want to curve the path, then drag the mouse while pressing the Ctrl and right mouse buttons. And when you're done, press Enter and the path will be drawn. For the remainder of the video, I'll go back to using the space method. Now let's move on to the fall off section. This section defines how the lines of our drawings will look like. You can either use one of the available presets in the list, some of them also appear here, or you can create your own. You can clearly see the difference between the brushes depending on the preset we choose. You should choose the fall off depending on what. If you want to curve the path, then drag the mouse while pressing the Ctrl on it. We can change the color to whatever we want. You can raise the value to get more color options. You can also switch between the two colors either by pressing X or by pressing on this button. And again, you can change the color of this one as well. Now let's jump to the stroke section. Here we can decide how to draw. Currently the stroke method is set to space, which
Painting on a model in Blender is super easy. The most important thing you'll need is of course your model, but even more importantly than that, it will need to be UV unwrapped in at least a semi-decent way. give your model a new material, then under the base color you can assign an image texture to it. Now, you can either open a texture file that you have already made, or you can make a new one here. And that's it. You can now go into texture paint mode and draw directly on the model. You can use your selection as a mask to hide certain parts from being painted, and the image will be drawn on. You can also change your editor to the image editor and paint directly on the 2D image inside of Blender as well. Just be sure to also save this image separately from the Blender file because it's not included. Anyway, I hope this helps because I know a lot of people have been asking about it.
This is my beginner's guide to texture painting
So I'm
in
just
Blender
done.
5.1. Now listen,
Whenever I
if you
click
are
on
completely new Blender, then do check out my
texture,
complete beginner's guide playlist. Link
try
in the
to
description. All the
paint the
way
mesh,
to
it
the
just
grey zone
doesn't
and it's
work.
fairly simplistic texture painting techniques. The more artistic you are, the more detail you'll be able to add, but hopefully whatever your level, you'll be pleased with the results. So let's get started. I'm in a completely new startup file. I'm in Blender 5.1.2, and I'm actually going to start with the default cube just here, so I'll scale it in the Y, to make that a bit thinner like so, and scale in the Z. So this is going to be a little bit more confusing. If I select one of them, turn on the auto mode vertices and press GG to edge slide, I can slide that into the other one there, so GG to edge slide, and it's just a triangle at the end there. So I can go around adding some bevels, so Control Shift B and bevel these edges. Again, this is a part you don't have to do as a beginner, but I just quite like the look of these bevels, and you can GG to slide along to create slightly different ones. So you can either choose to have it with those extra bevels or without. You might want to pause the video, catch up with me, so you've got just to be absolutely sure. Theoretically, 0.01 should work fine, but I just like to have a little bit of space. You go around marking the seams and the object. So I need to go up to the UV editing workspace for this. And the UV editing workspace has the viewport on the right hand side and the UV editor on the left. And a complex unwrap is where we go around marking the seams and we unwrap it so it's nice and clean. But there's a nice simple way to unwrap, and we'll do it the simple way for the sake of speed and simplicity. The simple way is to select everything with A and then press U to unwrap and Smart UV Project. That will bring up this menu just here. The only thing you need to change in here is the island margin. I would turn this up to 0.05 just to be absolutely sure. Theoretically, 0.01 should work fine, but I just like to have a little bit of space just in case. So we can press unwrap there, and on the left hand side you'll see the actual UV unwrap. So it's cut my 3D shape up and put it onto a 2D plane like this, so I can now texture paint. So that means I can go across to the texture painting workspace, which is right next to the UV editing just here. So I've got my 3D viewport on the right hand side here, and this time instead of the UV editor, I've got the image editor. There's no image in here at the moment, as you can see, and you'll see that my gravestone is all purple. That's because it hasn't got a texture connected to it. When you go into the texture painting workspace, it puts you in texture paint mode, and if you see the purple, there's no texture. We add a texture to this by going to the texture slots at the top here. I'll just show you what that does in the background, so you don't have to follow along with this bit. But if I click on the top corner here where the crosshairs change, click and drag to bring that down, and change this to the shader editor. I'll press N on the keyboard to get rid of the side panel. This is the current material, and a texture slot that you can see up here will bring in an image texture into the front here and plug it into the base color, and then we can paint on that, and it will be painting the color as it were. So let's go to the top where it says texture slot here and add in a new texture. I'll call this base color, and I'll call this gravestone color. I'm going to put a 2 at the end of it because I was testing this earlier. And with the width and the height, if I click and drag across the both of them, I can type in 2048 to double the size of this, so it's got more pixels and more detail to paint on, and I can change them both at the same time. So I've got a 2K texture here. I can turn off the alpha, that's the transparency, we don't need that. And for the color, I'm going to change it to a nice mid-grey, so a gravestone color, I guess. And I'll press add. So instantly my gravestone changes, and you can see up the top in my shader editor, I've got my gravestone texture here, and there is my gravestone texture just there as well, and it's completely grey, of course. So now we want to actually start painting. At the moment, we have the paint hard brush selected here, and you can also see that up the top here. This top menu, you can press middle mouse button to move across that menu, and you've got all the brush options there. You can also see them in the active tool and workspace settings on the side here. I'll just click and drag so that's a little bit wider. So these are all the same as the settings up the top here. You've got the size and the strength, and the size and the strength here, and you can change that with the F key on the keyboard. So F selected here, and you can also see that up the top here. This top menu, you can press middle mouse button to move across that menu, and you've got all the brush options there. You can also see them in the active tool and workspace settings on the side here. I'll just click and drag so that's a little bit wider. So these are all the same as the settings up the top here. You've got the size and the strength, and the size and the strength here, and you can change that with the F key on the keyboard. So F and then move your mouse side to side to change the size, and then Shift F will change the strength. I'll just bring that back out to 1 then. And let's actually start painting a little bit onto our object to make sure it's working. So I'll change the size of my brush there and just paint a black line. When I paint a line on my object, you can see instantly it comes onto the image down here in the image editor. And you'll also notice that there's a little star next to the image just here. So whilst you're painting, you're constantly updating the image, and Blender doesn't save it unless you tell it to save it. So you can save this entire file and forget to save your image and lose all your work. So it's really important that when you save your file, so file save, that you also go into image and save your image now. So I will save this image right now, so save as, and this is gravestone color 2. You can see my other text just there, and I'll save image. So now I've lost that star, I know this texture is saved. The file isn't saved yet, so there's not much point in that, but hopefully you get the idea that you need to save your texture as well as the file. So I'll quickly save my file as well, so save as, these are my practice ones. Okay, so I've got this black stroke in here, but I can use the fill brush to get rid of it. So there's the fill brush there, and I can choose my color and fill it in. So that can kind of reset everything if you want to use that. The other really useful tool in the fill brush is the gradient just here. And this is quite good for adding some gradient to your objects. So I can, with the gradient selected, just click and drag up to make it dark at the bottom and lighter at the top. I'm just going to undo that though and go to front view to do that. So click and drag from the bottom to the top like so. Got a nice bright top and a dark bottom. And that's a really good base to start from because most objects you have lighter at the top as the sun hits them and darker at the bottom. It's quite a nice stylized way of doing things. So you might want to catch it with me using the fill brush first with just the color and fill in the base color, getting rid of that black mark we made, and then use the gradient tool to create that gradient like I have here. Okay, so now comes the fun bit. Let's go back to the brush and let's talk a little bit about the brush settings. Now I'm using a graphics tablet, so I've got the option here to change the pen pressure. If I select both these two, that is actually the same as this one here, I believe. I know the paint hard is without the strength, but just the size. So these different brushes have different settings down here. I'll go back to the paint hard and show you that with the pen pressure both set, I can draw lightly and not much ink is coming out. That's the strength, and it's quite fine because of the size. If I draw harder, more ink is coming out, and it's a thicker brush. So I'll do those strokes, and I'll turn on just the size without. So when I use my brush, I press lightly on my pen, it will come out much thinner. Now if you are using
Yeah,
mouse,
it
this
seems
will roll
I'm
down
just
in the option
dumb
under stroke,
because
and I'll just open that
whenever I
before.
try
There's
to
a
use the
nice
brush,
draw now. You can see a
it
red
just
line,
doesn't
and that
work.
stabilizes the stroke, and it will change the
Oh well,
that will make it react
something to
faster.
think
That's
about
quite useful, especially
later
if
on.
you use. I'll do that and turn that off for now and just use it as its default. So let's start actually painting. So I'll scroll up to the top and change the color so it's a bit darker, and I'll just paint in the crevices. So I'm adding a bit of shading, probably a little bit too much. So I'll bring the strength down a bit to 2.5 and just paint in some shading in here. Okay, so really simplistic, and I'm going to keep this nice and simple just to show you how straightforward it can be. So there's some shading there, and I'm at the front, so this is -y just here, and I'm going to create a kind of inset just there. Actually, maybe this is an extrusion, it could be an inset, it could be an extrusion, it doesn't matter. It depends on what we do next as to whether it is or not. So I've drawn some simple shading just here. So you might want to catch with me, just drawing those lines in on your gravestone. Okay, so now I'm going to bring it up to a nice light white here and paint the extremities. So this is painting on the edges. In fact, that's not quite bright enough, so I'll bring that even brighter and paint the extremities here. But you'll notice that it's a little bit awkward because I've done the shading. It's nice and bright in the areas down here, but at the top, because I've got that gradient, it's not really working as well. So I'm going to undo that. Instead, I'm going to show you a different sort of brush. There's a blend option up here, which is currently set to mix, so it will just give me exactly this color. But I can change this to screen, which will always lighten what we see in the viewport. So the darker bits, it won't brighten them quite as much, and the light bits will brighten them up a little bit more. So I'm just going around all the extremities with a screen brush. And it looks a bit strange at the moment, but it's going to look fantastic, surely. You can be quite wobbly with these, you don't have to follow the edge. You do have to watch a little bit, you don't go over the edge like this. If I paint just here, it tries to get it to go around the corner, so I need to undo those strokes and then follow the edges a bit better. And just watch when you get to the corner. And so this is painting in these kind of extremities like this, to the edge here as well. And it's not doing a huge amount because it's very bright at the top here. I'll show you a way we can change that in just a moment. So now I've got those extremities painted, you can kind of start to see it working. And if I go on the inside here as well, this will look like it's extruded slightly. Let's do that again. So that should look a bit like it's sticking out. So this is the basics of texture painting. The extremities you make lighter and the crevices you make darker. And it's just a case of painting light and colour onto your object. The gravestone is fairly easy because we don't have to worry too much about the colour. So we're just thinking about light and dark. Okay, so not just want to catch up with me, trying to painting a gravestone in a simple way like I have here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is go to image and save my image, and let's talk a little bit more about what Blender's actually doing. Currently in the top here, if I scroll across the middle, I'm in solid viewport shading. Let's go to material preview mode and see what it
I don't know,
looks like.
whenever I click brush and a color to paint anything, nothing is being done, so I don't know, I'm either really unlucky or I'm making something wrong or I'm totally stupid. Well, that's enough for me for today.
Isn't really the best way of showing the final result, but it can be quite useful. The thing about texture painting is
I'll be finishing the 3D stream because I haven't learned much, I guess.
And then from the gravestone, and you can see
I haven't done much.
What we're seeing here with
I
the gravestone colour,
lost quite a lot of time on it.
and that's the whole point of texture painting. So I've drawn
So,
in the
yeah.
shadows and the light, so I don't actually need any lights in the scene.
That's
So
the
if
summary
you'll
of
see
today's
that if I
work.
select on the light, so Control Tab, go to Object Mode and select this light and delete it, it makes no difference.
Hey,
to my
thanks
object. That's
everyone
what
for
happens when I
coming.
apply straight into the surface. If I go from the principal BSDF here, and then you can see now the object with no lighting. This is
I'm taking a
This is
small
what you
break
like,
and
straight from the
we'll
colour into the
continue
material like this. It looks a little
playing
strange,
some
yeah,
games
but that's
later.
what you'll see when you export this to a game engine, that sort of thing. Just plug in
Thanks
straight
for
into the material.
watching.
One way to do text painting where you are painting on
I'll
all
see
the
you
different
around.
configurations of the objects. Okay, let's show you a few more techniques, and I'm going to keep it plugged straight into the material output. This is quite a nice
Be-
way
be
to
right
see if you
back
get
in
light
like
without
15-20
any lighting or shading
minutes.
in the scene. So I'll go back to text mode, so Control Tab,
See you
text
then.
mode, and incidentally, if you have a
Bye.
set up and you want it the same as mine, you can go to